Hey guys, how you doing?
Good. How are you?
Hey, Pat. How's it going?
Good. You hear the big news about Mr. Peanut?
Yeah, he was assaulted.
I forgot you're a dad too, so dad jokes abound.
What's funny about that is that Pat really wanted to tell this joke, and I just stole his punchline.
That's right. That's okay.
So it's going to be a short show, I think. Maybe not, but we only have 4 stories today, right?
Right.
Challenge accepted.
Yeah.
We'll stretch it out, I'm sure, with some knowledge.
Patrick likes talking.
First of all, we'd like to wish all our listeners a happy Chris Mahana Kwanzaa
Mm-hmm.
or whatever
100%.
it is, or Festivus, whatever you have. And all right, who wants to take the first one?
So we've got a 3 questions topic. We like to reduce these things down to the 3 questions people who have to deal with this stuff have to consider. One is, if there's an issue, how do I know if it applies to me? Well, the issue is there's a critical vulnerability found in Citrix, ADC, and gateway products. So Citrix is a big network provider. They do a lot of middleware and hardware, and they've been around for a while, and they've got products pretty much everywhere. You might not even know you have those products. That's back to our inventory thing. But there's a raft of versions. If you're using the Citrix Gateway version 13 or 12, and you're not up to the current patch level as of this show, then you might be affected. And it's an unauthenticated attacker could be allowed, if you didn't patch this, to get in and execute commands on the system remotely. So it's a remote system takeover, which is no bueno.
Oh, what do you mean no bueno? I love remote system takeovers.
Well, yeah, you like it when you're doing it.
That's my local Mexican Tex-Mex shop, taco shop. No bueno.
So this is a 9.8 on the CVSS score. It was disclosed and patched the same day, which is always good. Sometimes we've seen some things. I think the next story is where there's a longer lag between disclosure and patch. But there's this estimated 400,000 systems online that are exploitable with this problem.
Wow.
Yeah, which sounds like a lot, but the way that these systems are designed, these specific systems, they're actually made to allow people to access applications and desktops securely, I put air quotes in, over the internet. So it's not surprising that there's so many showing up available on the internet.
Showdown's just showing us how many are accessible, not whether they're unpatched, or is Showdown showing us how many were unpatched?
Yeah, it depends on who did the search. Right. So if they actually said, I'm looking for this artifact, like show me all the Citrix, application delivery controllers, ADCs, that are of this version or this version or this version, and they got a list. Yeah. My guess is what they did is said, okay, well, the ADC main homepage contains these words. Let's just do a search. So they could be patched. They might not be patched. Sometimes it's easy to verify and sometimes it's not. So.
Okay. So patch, just in case.
Update.
There's a lot of times we talk about on this show where something like this, where you have an RCE that can happen, because you're unpatched and it's a device that's sitting behind a firewall, right? It's like some internal piece of software. And it's like, yeah, you should patch. Ideally. Somebody may break in.
Ideally, it's behind the firewall.
User might run something they shouldn't. Right. But this is probably more important because this is typically connected directly to the internet or port forwarded.
And RCE is remote code execution. I know we've used that a lot, but we should still define it.
Keep iterating through. So
yeah.
Awesome.
All right.
So patch. Yeah.
So Mac OS is an OS that rarely is in the news for being breached, but in this case, Microsoft found a vulnerability, didn't they?
They did. Well, and I always find it fascinating. It used to be Apple would try and find bugs in Microsoft's code, and Microsoft would try and find bugs in Apple's code, and they would go back and then release it to the world like, oh my God, look how terrible Apple is, or oh my God, look how terrible Microsoft is.
I know, yeah, they were
right.
I think Jobs was more of an antagonist, against Microsoft than anybody.
And then Microsoft saved them.
Oh, absolutely, and it was right. Well, anyway,
from bankruptcy,
exactly, and it was good for business. I mean, they started the holy wars of operating systems, but
right.
And then you get your Mac zealots and your Windows zealots, and neither the twain shall meet.
I don't know if I've ever met a Windows zealot, but
I'm definitely a Windows fanboy. Does that count?
Fanboy is good. Zealot, I don't know. I mean,
I don't know. If you're still using your Zune, you're probably a zealot.
I have my Zune right here charging.
Well, that's not really Windows, but I think the Mac experience is probably a little smoother for your average computer user, or it historically has been. Maybe not now, but than Windows historically has been. That's for sure.
Yeah. An early architect of Windows, Jim Alchin, once said that if he had to do it again, he wouldn't give the user any configuration settings to mess with in Windows. And that's Mac's. That's kind of how Mac did it.
Right.
They went through and said, "This is the way you're going to do it. This way."
Yeah, convention over configuration.
Enjoy this way. And that gave them immense control. It gave them, cheaper testing. And it's a financial decision for support of the operating system, but it also very constraining. A lot of people are doing things in Windows you can't do on Mac.
Right.
And so, it's a different approach.
Yeah. They figured out how to let their users fall into the pit of success. So by default, everything works.
Or don't use that operating system.
Right.
90% of the time is fantastic.
Exactly. When you want to tweak something,
yeah, right.
I don't use Mac. I guess I'm the closest thing to a Windows fanboy, I guess.
I do. So I use Mac now. I didn't back in the day.
I don't touch Mac. Although Mac now has a Linux core, so I might be fine on Mac. But,
all right. So what's the vulnerability?
Oh, yeah, we should go back to that. Actually, okay, this one's actually really neat. So you know how, for the Windows listeners who are on listening to the podcast, if you download something over the web on your Windows computer, it gets this thing called Mark of the Web. Yep. And all that Mark of the Web is it's an alternate data stream attached to the file that says this file came from the internet. That's
yes.
it. I think it literally says Internet Zone. So if you double click on a file that came from the internet that is an executable, it'll say, hey, this is an untrusted file. Do you want to run it? Right? It throws up that extra warning.
Right.
Mac has this similar thing called Gatekeeper, which and it's actually quite a bit more aggressive than Microsoft's, which sounds like Apple, right? Like, okay, we're not even going to allow it to run at all. And when you download a file, it actually has a com.apple.quarantine, call it alternate data stream. It's not an alternate data stream because Linux doesn't support alternate data streams. That's a whole other podcast on file systems and subsystems and that sort of stuff. But assume that there's an attribute attached to this file. What Microsoft was able to discover is if they take that file and keep moving it between different types of formats, the Apple single and Apple double format, which we won't go into that, and then they archive the file, they can pull it out of the archive and the attribute doesn't stay. So now you can execute.
The archiving means what? Like creating a compressed version of it?
Yeah, exactly. Putting it in a compressed version and pulling it out. And that's classic in the Windows world if you want to deploy a virus, right? I mean,
wait a minute. Hold on. It's criminal career advice. All right. You said if you want to deploy a virus, okay, continue on.
Yeah, so if for most people who have ever gotten infected with ransomware nowadays, what happens is you have a link to download a quote unquote invoice or whatever, and it's in a zip. Well, why is it in a zip? Because a lot of times when you unzip that, it will not have the mark of the web. The zip will have the mark of the web, but the file that comes out won't. And that's why it can run.
That's okay. All right, but that's not necessarily true of everything. I know that if I download a zip file that has source code in it, from an endpoint, and I unzip it and then try to run that source code, Visual Studio will have all sorts of problems with it. You have to unblock the zip file first.
And that is because Windows, it depends on the compression utility you're using. So 7-zip would have not put the mark of the web. Windows native compression does. But You're right. All of the compression utilities have gone, oh my gosh, we're propagating these viruses because, we're not translating the mark of the web from the container to the file.
Yeah.
So when they started doing that, so what hackers have now started doing is saying, oh, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to take a ISO, which is, for those of you who don't remember CD-ROMs, you could have a CD-ROM image. It's a little disky thing. It's a circle, like a, I can't say small record. How do you describe a CD-ROM?
It's like never mind. But it's
coaster.
An ISO is a file that you can mount like a drive.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So now what virus purveyors of fine viruses are doing is they'll take that zip.
The only place that Dwayne shops for viruses.
Purveyors of fine viruses.
Fine viruses and malware.
Heinz, Franklin,
we need
and
a dark web. We need a dark web Harry Potter spin-off.
Yeah, order your Christmas baskets now.
Vintage malware. So what they're now doing is they're actually taking compressed files, zip files, and then inside of that they're putting ISOs, which are mounted drives, if you will.
Yeah.
In most, antivirus scanning and whatnot won't go inside the ISO, and then they literally the instructions in the email are like, okay, download this file, and then right click on it and extract it, and then right click on the ISO that's on the inside and mount it, and then go inside there and find a file and extract it, and then run your invoice.
It's the turducken of cyber.
Turducken of malware. That is a great analogy,
it's a
Patrick.
File ISO zipping.
Yes, that's what it is.
That's great.
That's what it is.
Sounds German.
Yeah, right.
So, needless to say, the whole point of this story is Apple is also susceptible to this. Microsoft found it out and said, "Hey, you know what? Viruses can get deployed there as well."
The Germans do have a term for that, and Carl almost got it right. It's file ISO zipping.
File ISO zipping.
The joy of turducken file systems. So what can you do about it? I have a Mac right here. Should I just check for updates?
Yeah, there's a patch. Yeah, I mean, it will get updated. So if you right now are on Mac OS Ventura version 13.1 or less, Mac Monterey version 12.6.2 or less, or Mac Big Sur 1.7.2 or less, go out, patch, and this mark of the web / Apple com.apple.quarantine will actually follow the file along when it comes down from the internet.
Let's talk about the disclosure date versus the patch date. So the patch date was the 13th of December. So it's been patched for 10 days. So hopefully if you get auto update on auto patch, you've got it already, which would be bueno. But it was disclosed in July, end of July this year. And so the whole, Mac doesn't have vulnerabilities or viruses and things. And when they do, they fix it immediately. This is a pretty long period of time, but I understand why.
Yep.
But there's also a bit of a culture at Microsoft that they get a problem, they're going to have to patch it, they have to jump on it. There's a culture probably at Apple that they're not going to have these problems, and so I think they catch them more flat-footed.
Well, and it's interesting too. So you say like 5 months, right? July to December. It was quote unquote kind of in the wild. But what's also interesting is that's because Microsoft found it 5 months ago. It doesn't mean it hasn't. It looks like it's been there forever, right? So it's been in the wild a long time.
No, I'm saying when it was disclosed. When it was disclosed. The number I have it as July 27th was the initial disclosure.
Yes.
And then and it's not seen in the wild. I don't believe there's been exploits against it by APTs or anything that we know of.
No, I do love the wording in this. They say, listen, on July 27th, we found this. And then, we mulled it over for a little while. And then we disclosed it to them, in July.
Oh, so maybe that's where I'm getting it wrong. They disclosed it to Apple.
No, exactly. 3 days. Within 3 days, they disclosed to Apple, which is good.
Well, you got to get out of bed and you got to find your Rolodex.
You gotta hope somebody uses it against somebody, whatever.
You leak it to a couple of forums, talk to your contacts.
For peer review, of course. Peer review.
That's right.
Have a cup of coffee.
Go have a tea in Tehran.
Walk the dog around the world.
Oh my God.
All right. So shall we move on to LastPass?
Yeah.
This is an interesting
You remember
one.
what we said the last time we talked about LastPass's data breach? It's like, don't worry. They didn't get your data.
Yeah. Did that age well?
No.
They got a little
no,
data.
it didn't.
They got a little data. They didn't get a lot of data. They got a little data.
Tell us what they got. Tell them what they've won.
Hey, kids. So interesting enough. And if you follow the article from LastPass, first off, kudos to LastPass because they're being, from what I can see, they're being fully transparent with the public and with their, not even just with their customers, but with the public. Like, hey, here's not only what happened in the breach and what they got access to and how they did it, but here is what our infrastructure looks like. These are the things we do. And here's why you can trust that your passwords haven't been compromised, which is awesome. But
they did get the keys though, and we said they didn't. That's
as far as we knew, they didn't.
As far as we knew, they didn't.
At the time, no. So and the other thing is, as you read through the process of attack here, this is not some kid with a lot of time after school because he's on December holiday break.
Right.
This is like APT style. There was a breach in August. Advanced persistent threat, nation state, very sophisticated. Level. This is a very sophisticated
top of the pyramid,
professional.
Attack. Yeah, top
of the pyramid. Good way to say it.
Top of the pyramid attack. Yep. So this is actors, advanced persistent threat actors took information from the August breach and leveraged that information to have a highly targeted attack against a specific employee at LastPass to garner credentials to then start navigating through the internal environment. It's not, and the way that they were going through the internal environment, I mean, they probably poured over any of the data that came out in August to understand infrastructure and layout and that sort of stuff. So it's, it wasn't just hey, you know what, I found this script on GitHub and I'm going to go run it against LastPass. No, oh my God, I got access to stuff. This was very targeted.
They fired at the ship, saw the defensive pattern and then fired again using that defensive pattern to get through.
Yep, exactly. So what's interesting is, as they got in, the way that LastPass's infrastructure is laid out, they have their own sort of headquarters, right? Infrastructure where what they call production networks and that sort of stuff. None of that was breached. What was breached was their cloud storage. So you could access anything sort of stored at rest in the cloud. So backups, for example, there's a lot of regulations around different regions in the world. For example, in the UK, data for UK customers can't leave the UK, right? So if LastPass isn't in UK, right, then they have to have some cloud provider there hold the data for them. It's the way the regulations are, right? So for them, they said, listen, nobody got access to our production environment, but because of regulations, we have to distribute this data around the world. And we do it for resiliency too. Yeah. And they got access to one of those cloud providers through the credentials that were targeted here.
Was it in the UK?
They didn't say which of the data centers.
Okay, so you just use that as an example.
Yeah. So what did they get access to? So, when they pulled down information, they got access to so here to date, we've determined that because I don't want to misspeak here, once the cloud storage access key and dual storage container decryption keys were obtained, the threat actor copied information from backups. So they took backup information that contained basic customer account information related to metadata, including company name, end user's name, billing address, email address, telephone number, IP addresses from which the customer accesses LastPass.
Wow.
So no passwords.
Nope. So they were able to pull down the encrypted vaults. But here's what LastPass said. You know how you have that master password that you set?
Yeah.
We don't know what it is. So it can't get stolen from us. So your data is encrypted with your master password. It's part of the algorithm. It's an AES 256-bit encryption, but it uses that password.
So let's back up for a minute, because we do have this is our second to last story, but the other ones shouldn't be too long either. Let's cover a couple of things. So I want to go back because Carl's always done a good job of holding us to the fire, and so I'm trying to help with that. You mentioned data at rest. Let's talk about that just for a second, and then we'll move on to encryption. Data at rest
isn't all data at rest?
No, it's not.
I've never heard of active data.
This is where I'm going to translate between the mind of Dwayne and the audience.
All right,
so
good.
Data at rest is data stored somewhere. And we talk about encryption at rest, like having the files encrypted on the drive. But when you're using the data, when the data is read into memory, when the data is being broadcast from one place to another, that's data on the move.
In motion,
it's not at rest anymore.
I get
data
you.
in motion.
It's not necessarily moving itself, but it is being moved.
Correct.
So your encryption strategy has to have data at rest. How do you store the data while it's on the hard drive? Like Dwayne just said, these vaults are encrypted.
Yeah.
And how do you deal with it while it's in motion? When you're moving it from one to another, does it move encrypted? And when you're processing it, how is it stored and encrypted in memory? Those are all gets very complicated. Yeah.
How would you associate this to the military? Data at rest is like a safe house, and data in motion, and you're moving a prisoner. Is it?
It's a good idea. It's a bunker. It's a larder. So basically, you'd be in a bunker.
I'm sorry, a larder.
Isn't that a refrigerator?
Aren't those the people in the fields
the
that use the Nerf bats? No.
That's where you keep the food. So we had to guard an ammo bunker system in Germany. That I don't know if it's still operational, so I won't mention exactly where it was, but it was close to where the Elvis was stationed, so it was a very nice place. And they had these big bunkers that were dug underground, and they stored the ammo there because you didn't want it to blow up. So that's encrypted at rest in the military version. But when you're trying to move that stuff, or you're trying to move troops, you'd put it in an armored personnel carrier or an armored vehicle, and that's how you'd guard it while it's in motion.
In transit.
Right.
Nice. So the military's done this for years.
Yes, we just didn't call it this.
So here's the question that is on everyone's mind. While it's at rest and encrypted, can it be decrypted?
Well, that's the next thing I wanted to talk about. Is we throw around the word encrypted, decrypted. There's other. I want to cover a couple of concepts if you guys will indulge me. Let's do it. So there's three things I like people to understand for them to get it, to grok it. One is they need to understand that there's something called encoding of data. And when you encode data, you do something like you run it through a base 64 encoding. All you're doing is trying to fit it on a channel more efficiently. There is no security gain for it.
Right. It's like compressing or uncompressing. You're just changing the format.
Exactly. It looks gobbledygook. It's not human readable anymore.
Right.
I don't know how Dwayne's brain works. He might be able to read it.
But you could take any converter in any language and just turn it back into what it was.
It's two-way. It's not secure.
Yeah,
it's not
no
encryption. Encoding is not encryption. And it's a big problem because we see organizations, especially developers, and all three of us are developers, who will do base 64 encoding and say, well, that's encrypted.
Yeah.
And not think about the ramifications. It is not. It's kind of like having a piece of rice paper as your door and say, well, the door is closed. They can't get in. Okay. There is no security inherent to encoding. So that's the first concept.
Okay.
Second concept is hashing versus encryption.
Yes.
Hashing is to take some value, script, text, string, whatever, and run it through a process. That can be a well-known process. The MD5 hash is a well-known process. But it can't be reversed because it's lossy.
It's one way.
But it always reduces to the same thing. So if I take the Pledge of Allegiance, I take the text of the Pledge of Allegiance and I render it in exactly a certain way with the same capitalization and the same spaces, and I run it through a hash, I'll get like a 24 character or 36 character piece of gobbledygook. No one can read, but it represents that text. And if I do it again, it'll come to the same. And if I keep doing it, it'll always be that hash. But if I change one character, it'll suddenly be a different hash that's not related.
Yeah. So if you hash something it cannot be unhashed. It's a one-way encryption.
Correct. And so, so let's say I'm trying to store my password in Active Directory.
Right.
Do we really want Active Directory storing my actual clear text password? No, we don't. So, but Windows Active Directory has to have my password, or at least be able to recognize that I've provided my password. So let's say Dwayne's the keeper of the Active Directory, and we create an account and in his presence on the Active Directory controller, and we say my password is security this week, recorded by Riverside, real long password. Now, he's not going to store that. He's going to hash it and store the hash.
Right.
And then when I go to a client later and I say, my password is security this week at, recorded with Riverside, my client's going to hash that password I provided. It's never going to send it over the wire. Remember we talked about over the wire? We don't trust it over the wire. So the password stays on my local system, gets hashed, and the hash gets sent over the wire. And Dwayne takes the hash he gets from my client, takes the hash out of his storage and says, yeah, they're the same. He knew the password.
Yep.
He doesn't know the password anymore.
Right.
That always blows my mind, first off, that you can take any length text, binary, whatever, and put it through an MD5 hash, and it's always going to come out to a 32 character string.
The same one.
And that's what Patrick was saying about being lossy. It doesn't have all of the data in the hash,
Correct.
but it can calculate, all of those things.
Well, but it's close enough. There's few enough collisions.
Right.
And a collision is when two separate different strings would result in the same hash. That happens.
Yeah.
But it might be the Gettysburg Address in Pig Latin and the password, I love dogs, have the same hash, but that's not going to hurt us in this scenario in our usage.
Right.
Yeah, and it's super rare. I mean, to talk about collisions, there are some collisions in there, but if you take a look at just the number of hashes that can be generated by like an MD5 hash generator, it is 0.1% of the number of atoms in the universe.
Oh my.
So, although it's only 32 characters, the amount of combinations there, it's unique, right? So collisions are going to be rare.
Yeah.
Has it ever happened?
In our usage?
Right.
It does, yeah. If you think about it, there's 32 characters with numbers, letters, symbols, all that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But I could hash every single 1,000-word string there is. And there's a lot more of those than there are 32 character strings. So there are collisions. They're all over the place. It's just they're not in our experience because
correct.
We're not using it to brute force all strings under the sun. Now let's talk about how you attack them. How do you attack a hash? Well, you can.
Now I'm listening.
It's criminal career advice.
I just want to prepare the listener to get their notepad out.
So for a long, long time, for more than 20 years, the way you deal with attacking a hash is if you have a hash. So here's another example. If I go to your house and I get a Wi-Fi pineapple or I get an application running on a device, I can listen in the air and I can see you authenticate with your Wi-Fi and I can get the hash of the password for your Wi-Fi network. Now, I don't know what it is, so how do I guess it? So if I can guess the password, hash the password, and compare it to your hash, I can know whether it's right or not.
Right.
So we just use a really powerful computer with perhaps a dictionary to start with, and we say, is it Apple? Is it Apple 1? Is it Apple 2? Is it Frisbee? Is it security? Is it I love dogs? So you have
millions and millions
billions.
Of words.
So
billions.
We have a 5 billion word dictionary to start with that's based on breaches that we found on the internet. And so if somebody's used the password and there's 5 billion in there and our crack cluster can do about 3 to 5 billion hashes a second. So we can go through that dictionary in a second. So if your password's in the dictionary, we get it in less than a second. If it's not in the dictionary, it might take us 15 seconds or 20 seconds.
History question, Patrick. You talked about how to crack a hash and you and quote unquote, it's always, I'm going to crack this hash. You're not cracking it. You're right. You're rehashing words out of a dictionary and then comparing them. When do you think the some of the earliest implementations of this were.
I mean, Loftcrack was my first experience with it, but I'm pretty sure it predates
so that's in the 90s. So have you guys ever read The Cuckoo's Egg? Cliff
yeah, great. Cliff Stoll.
1989, he documents what's widely kind of perceived as the first tracking of an online computer hacker. And he's an astronomer. Fantastic book. I've read it 3 or 4 times.
And also a great
now.
documentary.
Yeah, and it used to be required reading at the FBI for their cyber division. But he talks about in 1989, a German hacker breaking into his computers. And he saw him always listing out the password file, which is a list of hashed passwords. He's like, I don't understand why he's doing this. And then halfway through the book, he's like, oh my gosh, I think I understand what he's doing.
They're inside the building.
Right. And he's like, I think they're comparing them against against a dictionary, and they're hashing the dictionary words and comparing them. And he said, I contacted my contact at the NSA, I think is the one he was talking to. And he's like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I just figured this out. I think this is what they're doing. Right. And they're like, yeah, we've known that for 10 years. So
now, before
1979, it's not a new tactic.
No, but it's evolved, because then came the concept of rainbow tables. So here's the thing. When this has been an underground arms race that people have been aware of. We've been in it since the early 90s. But what happened was somebody realized, well, this takes a long time. Because remember, processing wasn't what it is now 20 years ago, 30 years ago.
Right.
So they were like, well, how can we make this faster? Well, what if we took 1 billion passwords, right? And because we can't do 1 billion a second back in those days, it was like you were lucky to do thousands per second back in those days. But what if we pre-hashed 1 billion common passwords and put them in a database? And we traded storage and time ahead of time for a quick lookup against the database. Because database lookup of 1 billion objects is pretty fast. So rainbow tables was the idea of, what if I could pre-hash, save and index all of the passwords that it might be. So when I get a hash, I first look it up in my rainbow tables to see if it's there. And if it is, I have the password. I'm done.
Wow.
Right.
So the problem is, for the hackers, they get big and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. The passwords get longer, but also the speed with which we can crack them gets bigger.
Yeah.
The sample dictionary gets bigger. And so, as you see, this is an arms race that the user is unaware of. Right. This is why we started asking people to add password complexity.
Right.
This is why we say that the length of the password is the most important. Can we get a link on this show, Dwayne, to how long it takes to crack various passwords in 2022?
Yeah, they do it every year. Yep.
We should link to that today and have people review, because this is like our last show of the year, review their passwords against that standard,
right,
and figure out whether they're secure. Now, there's a difference between an offline attack and an online attack. An online attack is when I can't get the hash, but I can get the system to tell me whether the password's correct or not. So, like, if I'm trying to break into Dwayne's router at home and he's made it accessible from the internet, I may be able to get it to respond 1,000 times a second. It shouldn't, but I might be able to. And that's slow by these standards, but if he's got a weak password, I still might get it. That's an online attack. That's much harder for me because I only get 1,000 guesses. I can't throw hardware at it. And he might notice it because it's noisy. But an offline attack, I walk by your house and get your Wi-Fi password hash. I can take that and I can run it against supercomputers as much as I want, and you have no idea that I even have it. So that's an offline attack. Offline attacks against hashes are far more dangerous than online, but you also want to prevent the online attack.
So let's bring this back to LastPass. So they say the keys were stolen. So does that mean that somebody could run, the person who has that data could run a hash crack with a dictionary against those hashes?
No. So what could happen is, because they have the keys and they have the backups, if they knew your master password, or if your master password was terrible, then they could guess what that master password is. We didn't talk about hash and salt and all that other good stuff. We talked about hash, but not salt.
No, because we talked about hash, But that's the next thing is, and Carl brought it up at just the right time. What we just talked about was just hashing. We didn't talk about encryption.
Right.
And this is AES 256-bit encryption.
Okay.
So encryption is not hashing. That's the second step. Hashing is a one-way function. We can brute force them. We got down that rabbit hole. That's how passwords are attacked. Encryption is the idea. There's both symmetric and asymmetric encryption. Let's just talk about symmetric. Symmetric is there's a password that was used to encrypt. I need that password to decrypt it.
Yeah.
So the same password encrypts and decrypts. AES 256-bit is a symmetric encryption.
Okay.
System.
If you have the key, you can both encrypt and decrypt.
But it's a 256-bit key.
Yeah.
Key, right. And the way that they've designed the algorithm, it still requires your master password. They don't know your master password, and all of your sensitive data is encrypted with the master password. Think of the master password as a piece of entropy in the encryption.
Yes, but somebody has my LastPass vault, and they have the hash of my master password, don't they?
Nope.
No, they don't.
Nope. No. LastPass does not keep any artifacts of your master password. They don't know what the hash is. That's why they can't decrypt your data. Because literally, you get the encrypted data comes down to your phone or computer, and when you type in your master password, it uses that at the client level to decrypt the data locally on your workstation so you have access to it. They don't have access to it. They don't even know what it is. It's never transmitted to them. Like, they just don't know it.
Wow.
It's like getting a hold of somebody's iPhone but not knowing how to unlock it.
Yeah.
So what's interesting about that is, they require at least 12 characters as a master password, which is reasonably weak. We've always said here longer is better. And in this particular case, longer is better because a 12-character password, if I had all the right pieces like the hackers do, and I guess that 12-character password, now I can unlock your vault.
That's the minimum.
I would recommend.
You can have a longer
recommend
password.
to all my friends using a passphrase, which is like a little, because it's easier to remember lyrics of songs, and I don't recommend you use lyrics of songs, but think about it that way. If you're going to write a song about you, write something that's creative. That is a sentence, really.
Yep.
And, up to maybe 100 characters long. It's not that difficult to remember.
Nope.
It's a lot easier to remember a passphrase than it is to remember, now which password is this? Is it this one with that
20 characters makes a huge difference from 12.
Right.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, 100%. So the recommendations to customers who are using LastPass, first off, don't panic. Be on the alert, because they do have some sensitive information around your email address, your company you work for, and that sort of stuff, potentially, right? Depending on what data you've put in the sign-up forms.
Yeah.
So be careful there, because you might see a rise in phishing emails. You might see a rise in spear phishing emails about LastPass. So there may be an email that comes to you and says, hey, just we're from LastPass, blah, 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 but it's from, joejoker@yahoo.com, right? So you want to be careful as to what you click on, like always. And then I would change if your master password is not strong, I would change it. I would make it stronger.
Mm-hmm.
And by stronger, we typically mean longer here, because that is not crackable. Those would be our recommendations.
Yes. Okay, good. So the long and short of it is, there's more information about this hack. Yes, they got some keys, but no, you do not have to worry. Your passwords are still safe.
Correct. And if your master password is a joke, please go make it
not
longer.
Jokey.
Not jokey.
All right. So on to the bad Santa department of the show today.
This was fascinating.
This is great. So this is from crooksandliars.com, which I never even saw this website before this story showed up. Mom booted from Christmas show due to facial recognition. Calls for U.S. facial recognition ban grow after a mom was booted from Radio City Music Hall watching the Christmas spectacular featuring the Rockettes.
Yeah, with her
in New York City.
With her daughters and her daughter's Girl Scout troop.
So let me just read a little bit of this. Digital rights advocates on Tuesday called for a ban on private use of biometric surveillance technology after a mom taking her daughter to see a Christmas show in New York City was kicked out of the theater after its facial recognition system identified her as an employee of a law firm involved in legal proceedings against the venue's operator. That's the story right there. You don't need to know anything more.
When I first saw the title of this, I thought she's like a human trafficker or a drug runner or something. It's like, oh no, she works for a law firm and she's a Girl Scout mom. Like, what? Yeah. Why would she be banned?
I hope she owns them. I hope she sues them out of existence.
Yeah.
Well, because it's the information. It's how they acted with the information.
Yes.
So people are up in arms about the fact that they're using that they're able to get that information with facial recognition. I think that ship has sailed. We're at a point where I can use facial recognition. Dwayne's played around with it. It's what they
did with it.
Right. It's bollocks. What you do with it. And that's always going to be the case.
So Radio City Music Hall, who is, I believe, owned by Madison Square Garden Entertainment, MSG. MSG right now is in a litigation with her law firm. So apparently her law firm is on the other side of some legal battle. And they've said, we've banned all of your employees from all of our properties.
Wow.
So their claim is it's private property. We allow people to come here.
It's legal.
Yeah.
It's just bad.
Just discriminatory.
It's just, yeah, exactly.
It's just
because
bad.
of who you work for, you can't come here anymore.
It's the Christmas show.
Right.
It's your mom. It's a mom with her daughter.
This is a PR disaster.
It's a PR disaster. Exactly. Bad Santa. Bad Santa.
Yeah. And apparently the Girl Scouts still got to see it. Her daughter still got to see the show, but she was actually detained.
Yeah, because she's a good mom.
Yeah.
And she makes her even more, sympathetic that she waited outside.
Standing there in the cold.
So I'd like to see her sue MSG Entertainment and win and put them out of business.
I wouldn't want, I don't want them to go out of business. That's bad.
No, come on.
What we want is the people involved in doing the discrimination need to be fired.
How about under new management
I like
this
that
mom?
idea.
How about under new management by this mom?
There you go.
No, but this is security run amok.
Yes.
Or vindictiveness. I hope it really, they have to backpedal badly because if this story stays in the news, it's not going to be good for business.
Now, take this to the next hacker level. What if you're able to break into that database and mark anybody as, seize on site?
It could be swatting.
A criminal or
it's like swatting.
Exactly. Right. So, I could see this actually being, not great in a lot of ways depending on how you trust the data, right? So, and as a hacker, we should get
everyone on that security staff and mark them as having felony warrants out on their name.
Right.
So they walk into work and they get arrested by each other.
Yeah.
I'm not under arrest. You're under arrest. All right, I'm taking it too far.
On that note,
we hope you all have a happy and safe holiday season and a happy new year. And what else can we say?
And for the holidays, please treat yourself with a better, longer password.
Absolutely.
Yes.
And the ones you love.
You deserve it.
You deserve it. All right.
Splurge on that longer password.
All right. We'll see you next year.
Thanks, guys.
Bye, guys.
Bye.